Okay, hopefully that's the hardest part of the afternoon for me. So I just want to, before I start on mine, I have taken the landscape certification courses. We've got level 1, 2, and 3 so far have been held. I have really enjoyed them. I don't stand up here as someone who has been gardening with natives their whole life. As a matter of fact, I've spent 20-some years of my life outside of America. So that was one of the ways that I was able to really gain a lot of knowledge about something that I thought was really important. So I hope if you haven't done it, you do take the opportunity to take those courses. So before I start, how many of you spend time in your wildscape every day? Like just enjoying it, watching what's happening. It's a really healing experience, isn't it? Yeah? I love it. So a successful wildscape that's full of locally native plants is good for our bodies as well as for nature. And as we've already seen today, that diversity is vital to sustaining our wildlife. We know that different bats will like different plants to sleep in or to nest in or roost in. I'm not exactly sure what that word is. Jaime's yard prairie can contain a variety of plants that will change through the seasons. Different flower shapes attract specific pollinators. Different leaves are going to feed specific insects or animals. Different densities of foliage will benefit our wildlife, whether it's for nesting, perching, or sheltering from predators. Some wildlife prefer the top of the tree canopy, and some are down at the roots of our prairie grasses. We must continue to support organizations like the Katy Prairie Conservancy in their fight to gain back and restore lost habitat and the large contiguous swaths of land needed to sustain wildlife of all sizes. But we know we can make a difference in our own wildscapes. Each native plant that we put back into the land provides a chance for our wildlife to find refuge and continue to exist. So, let's take a minute and think about our space. Like I really want you to just think about your wildscape. Take a little walk around it and think about what's in it. Whether it's acreage, an average city lot, or an apartment patio, how can we maximize our habitat's potential? Maybe you have lots of big trees, some beautiful beds of wildflowers, but you've got nothing between. Maybe you have a lot of concrete. Can you add a vine in a container to add some height? Is your garden gorgeous in 1 or 2 seasons, but nothing's flying or moving or munching on it in other seasons? What are you missing? What can you add to fix that? Do you have lots of mulch surrounding individual plants? I see this a lot, even in people's wildscapes. What can you add to fill in those spaces? Do you have some non-native plants that just aren't really bringing anything to wildlife? Is it time to replace those with something that is beneficial? Is your garden just along the fence or the house? Can you give up some of that sunlit lawn to make more space for our wildlife? Have you encouraged your neighbors to go native? And I think earlier, have you encouraged your neighbors to go native? Raise your hand. Have you invited your neighbors into your yards? This is so important. You know, it's like, even if it's in your backyard, especially if it's in your backyard. I have had like construction workers working on houses nearby come back and just take a walk. Or if they're working on my house, I bring them out there and they learn something. My lawnmower guy, no, don't do that. Let me show you. So I take them out and I show them, you know, the butterflies that are chomping on the leaves and stuff like that. So take those opportunities to teach people. It really makes a difference. As I go through the slides in a second, I want you to think about all of those things. Make a list. Did you all get this sheet? Did you get it? You got it? We got an email on it. I'm going to hit the next slide. Okay, oh well, so actually I'm going to start with a few photos of our happy place. We literally go back into our garden, and it is in the backyard. I have a really strict HOA. I am not ever going to have Jaime's front yard anytime soon. But we just love our backyard. We call it Prairie Grass Garden, and it just changes all the time. It's just such an amazing place. So many different things visiting, something different to look at all the time. And so before I start on the slides for the plants today, I want to cover a little bit of housekeeping. And one is use botanical names. We had a great speaker come to our chapter this spring, Carol Clark. I don't know how many of you heard that. And it was great. It was entertaining. It was informative. What she was talking about was what the Latin words in botanical names mean and how that might help you to choose a plant. Like, you know, is it Yucca Folium, so it's foliage like a yucca, things like that. But one of the things that she emphasized that I think we all need to emphasize is it doesn't matter how you pronounce the words. We're all going to pronounce them differently. What's important is that we use those names when we're shopping for plants, because a lot of plants from Africa and North America have the same common names. And if you go to the nursery and you ask for that, you might end up with something you really didn't want. So when you're shopping, make sure you're looking at that botanical name. Next is know your plants. Many of the plants that are native or non-native have developed defense mechanisms that might make them poisonous to humans. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. So just know what you're putting in your garden and be aware of that. First Latin word for the day is mycorrhizae. This is a beneficial fungi, which when you're putting your plants in your ground can really help your plants succeed. It's a really interesting topic, and Hannah Locke, who is doing her PhD research on this fungi, is going to be talking at our January meeting. So if you think that's interesting, I hope you join us for that one as well. I used a lot of great resources for these slides, but number one was this handout. So in the email or when you registered or whatever, you were given a link to the plant list. So you can either, there were a few copies floating around, maybe you grabbed those, maybe you printed it off. I'm going to be going through this alphabetically. I'm not going to hit all of them because there's a lot of great plants out there. So I'm just going to touch on a number of them. And then, so this was my main source. The Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, I think most of us have already visited that. It's a great resource. Some people don't know that the U.S. government has a great database on plants. It's USDA.gov, and it will be really specific on some of those pages if you go in there, and it also will help you determine if something is native or not native to your region. And also, thank you to a number of our chapter members who either sent me photos or gave me information about some of the specific plants that I wanted to have pictures of today. First is Asclepias perennis. I love this milkweed. I have 5 milkweeds that are native to our region growing in my garden. I do not use tropical milkweed. If you do have tropical milkweed, I encourage you to start buying the natives. Get those established. Give them time. It might take a little bit for them, but start now because I really do think that's the way to go. And there really is a native milkweed for every garden. There's just one out there. So Asclepias perennis is one of my favorites, and I think it's really versatile. Again, it's the aquatic milkweed, and a lot of people say, oh, swamp milkweed, and they're 2 different things. So look for that botanical name perennis. This one is a perennial. It's going to get maybe 18 to 24. I don't know if mine get 24. I think they probably are staying closer to the 18. I have this planted in at least 5 different places in my garden, and you can see this one down here. It's my light. The one on the bottom, this one is in full sun, all day, full sun, and it does not really get supplemental watering. So even though it says aquatic, once it's established, it's going to be a little bit more drought tolerant. And then above it, this is the shadiest location I have it in, and it does get a fair amount of shade. And you can see it's actually growing up in a bed of lyre-leaf sage, so you can just put this in with anything. It doesn't have to be like just one little plot of this milkweed. But I still get blooms on it. The monarchs still use it. I have harvested seeds from that and grown more of this milkweed, so I think it's a really versatile, great plant. I do want to say something as well about that. I do have my milkweed spread out all over. And the reason that I do this is I think that I'm trying to help prevent having all the eggs in one basket. It's like, oh, if something goes wrong, then, they're somewhere else. And I like to think I'm making it a little harder for those predators to find my babies. It's not one-stop shopping, right? So spread it out, and, they're really just not that special and different. You can mix them in with your garden plants. Next is the Baptisia sphaerocarpa. Yellow wild indigo is such a bright, happy plant in the spring, early summer. It's a legume, so it's going to be a nitrogen fixer for you. The thing I wanted to point out about this is I have to admit I didn't actually look at what these look like in the pot. But generally, we notice in the nursery that the Baptisias don't look really upright and perky a lot of times when you find them in the nursery. They tend to be kind of this little thing coming off the side with a few of these quite pretty leaves, I think. And then you put them in your garden and people say, well, it's not really doing anything. Well, the thing about our natives is often it's really about those roots. And it takes a while for those roots to really get established. And the saying that I like to use when I'm talking to people about gardening with natives is, it sleeps, it creeps, it leaps, which means maybe when you put it in, it doesn't really do anything. And then it's going to maybe start to do a little bit more. And then before you know it, you've got something gorgeous in your garden that is not just beautiful, but it's benefiting so much more. And the Baptisias are going to bring in your native bees. I get lots of native bees on mine. It's a host plant for several of the dusky wings and some other things. Drought tolerant, really pretty round seed pods. That's going to be the difference between the sphaerocarpas. It's a round seed pod, which is also attractive, I think. Carex Cherokeeensis, see, there's my Latin. Cherokee sedge looks like a grass. It is a sedge, not a grass, but you can use this in a lot of the same ways that you would use one of your clumping grasses. And it's a really pretty rich green. I don't know, has anybody had this one in their garden? I love it in mine. So I use it, as you can see here in mine, I have it just as a specimen at the moment. And it's a very carefree, easy plant. It doesn't spread like crazy. This is it has afternoon shade. It's not really a wet area, but it's one of those maybe a little bit less drainage areas, not standing in water, but less drainage. Beautiful fuzzy seed heads on it. Attracts some pollinators and songbirds. You can use this as a ground cover. It's real pretty mixed in beds to fill in those mulch spaces or those empty places that'll help you keep your weeds down. Casmantium sessiliflorum. This is a relative of the inland sea oats. And it's a little bit different, as you can see, where the inland sea oats has that really incredible seed head, right? So this one has these smaller seeds on it that are just spread so widely on that stem. And, this is the Southwest Biodiversity says, grows in rich woods, meadows, and swamps, especially on the coastal plain. Mary says hers is in pretty dry soil. So hers is maybe a little bit shorter, but she's really happy with it, and she thinks this is another thing that you could use maybe as a replacement for Liriope or something else in your garden. Desmanthus illinoensis is the Illinois bundle flower. This is going to get maybe 1 to 3 feet high. It loves sun. These are just so pretty in the prairie. You get your white balls of clusters of flowers on it in the summer, and then these really beautiful seed heads. I think those seeds are my favorite seeds out on the prairie. It's just a really distinctive thing, and it's something else to look at in your garden after other things are maybe not happening. It brings in different pollinators, and those birds will enjoy those seeds. Elephantippus carolinianus is the Carolina elephant's foot. It's a perennial, and this says 1 to 3 feet. This is a photo from Katie Imdy's garden. Katie says hers is maybe 18 inches, I think she said. So this is it's a perennial, but it's going to have more leaves on the bottom, which a lot of times, or bigger leaves on the bottom. And a lot of times it seems like things are a little spindlier on the bottom. This one, I think the leaves are a little bigger on the bottom. It takes part shade or shade. It's going to reseed. So if you're looking for something to fill in that kind of a shadier area, this might be the one for you. If you don't, you can just pull them up. I don't think it's that hard to pull these up. It's going to be dormant in the winter. Gorgeous. I just think that's such a sweet bloom up there with a little 3-leaf thing growing behind it. Eryngium Yucca Folium. Everybody knows this one. Does anybody not know this plant? I love this plant. I didn't used to love it, but the more I see it and what's happening on it in my garden, the more and more I adore it. So this is a perennial that's going to get up to 5 feet high. And what it is you've got your low yucca-like growth here on the bottom here, and that's going to be evergreen for you. It's going to shoot up your tall stems with these lovely flower clusters at the top. And those clusters they really do bring in so many pollinators. I get bees, beetles, butterflies. My favorite thing to see on these is the bumblebees, because the bumblebees, that flower head's kind of a rough thing.
Thing is fading.
I'm fading?
Button right at the top. See it?
There we go. All right. So that flower head is a really kind of a rough thing. And the bumblebees get on this thing, they'll zip all the way around one, and then they fly to the next one, zip all the way around, and they will just keep going. And that's, Bob and I aren't too hard to entertain. We find that very entertaining in the evening. It's a happy life at Prairie Grass Garden. So low to medium water, it takes some drought. And so if you do not want this, I think it's a very distinctive plant. After the flower heads are going to be that greenish white. If it starts to go dark and you're not really happy with it, or if it got too tall and it's really kind of leaning and you don't want to be staking it anymore, you can trim that down. When you trim that down, remember to keep that stalk so you've got a place for overwintering for some of your insects.
It won't advance there. It'll just be your point.
Okay. All right. So Janammus Americanus, the strawberry bush, is a perennial deciduous shrub. And this one's going to be a little bit bigger, 6 to 12 feet. It likes part shade or shade. It's probably going to get more flowers and berries on it with a little more sun on it. This one likes water. So I wouldn't put it somewhere it's going to be getting really dry all the time. It makes these really attractive seed heads on it, kind of a reddish color with the orange berries. And some birds are going to eat the seeds, but the thing about this is that the mammals like to eat it. Especially deer. So the other name for this plant is the ice cream plant, because the deer think it is a really good treat. So if you're looking for something deer resistant, this will not be your plant. Gaillardia pulchella. We have a number of really great Gaillardias in our region, and this is probably the most prevalent one, the Indian blanket. You're going to see it in the ditches. You're going to see it in the fields everywhere. I love this plant in my garden. Some people think it gets a little too big. I say trim it. It's, if it's coming over my sidewalk, I literally will just trim it off and it's going to bounce back. This baby blooms almost year-round in my garden. And it says you deadhead in the summer to prolong blooms. I am way too lazy to deadhead. So it just keeps blooming for me, and I really love it. And this is a huge favorite for the native bees in my garden. I don't think you ever would go out to any of my patches of Gaillardia and not see bees on it. Okay, the Hymenocallis liriosum is the spider lily. The thing I want to point out here is Mark has asked me to let everyone know that the spider lilies on sale today are dormant. So it looks like an empty pot, but he assures you there is something alive and well growing in the soil. So if you could just go ahead and plant it and maybe put a marker in front of it so you don't forget you put it there because, you know, out of sight, out of mind. But he assures us it will come up if you plant it somewhere that will make it happy. These like some moist to standing water. These are the plants you're going to see along when you're driving in the country, along in the ditches. A little bit of standing water. Doesn't always have to be in standing water, so we see it a lot by the prairie potholes out in the prairie. They are just lovely. It's got the green growth on the bottom shooting up a stem with these gorgeous white flowers, maybe 2 to 3 at the top. It's just a really pretty plant. Sun or part shade. The Iris brevicalis is the zigzag iris, perennial, maybe 1 foot high, sun, part shade, shade. Doesn't sound like you can go wrong with this, does it? It is a gorgeous blue flower that's going to bloom for you in the spring, like March, April. These are from Dennis Martin's garden, and Dennis has his under pine trees and next to a bird bath. So maybe the soil's a little bit acidic, and it is getting bath water dumped on it, but it seems to be doing pretty good. The Costoletskia virginica is the salt marsh mallow. It's another deciduous shrub, and this is not going to be like a heavy shrub. It's one of those kind of loosey shrubs. Things are growing through it. This one, it says it does best in high acidity, but I really don't think you need to have high acidity for this plant. I think it's worth trying because you see it along the coast and everything where things maybe aren't as acidic. This is going to like a wet area, so moist to very wet. Gorgeous 2-inch blooms that just popping out. I think they look very tropical, gorgeous. Attracts bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and it's a host plant for the painted lady butterflies. Lantana urticoides. The Texas lantana might also be called the Lantana horrida. So urticoides or horrida. If it has chimera on it, do not buy it. It's our only native lantana. It's a shrub, and it's going to get maybe 3 to 6 feet high, 3 to 6 feet wide. Now you can see by the fence line on mine, this one doesn't get 3 feet in my garden, but it definitely spreads quite a bit. But I don't know if you can see it, there's all sorts of things growing through it. So, when that's not flowering, maybe something else underneath it or coming through it might be flowering and giving you some other benefit. These might they might freeze for you in the wintertime. They may not. If they freeze, a lot of people like that because it helps to keep it sort of in bounds. But they can take trimming, so don't be scared if you think that's too big of a shrub for you because you can trim it down. These are low water. They're drought and heat resistant. In the summer, when it's 100 degrees day after day after day, this baby will be blooming for you. It's just fantastic. And the berries, so we've got the berries up here in the corner that are green. Those are going to turn a dark color, and birds are definitely attracted to these berries, which is why I'm asking you not to buy the non-native lantana, because the birds are dropping those berries everywhere, and we've got lots of that non-native growing out in the wild areas and fields and everything else. Liatris pycnostakia is our Kansas blazing star. We have a number of really wonderful Liatrises in our area. This one, I think, is maybe our stockiest. And it is going to shoot up these spikes that are going to be all the way around with the blossoms on it. Excuse me. As you can see, very attractive to bees. I've seen hummingbirds visiting mine. These do sometimes, if you have a really wet spring or something like that, sometimes they really do shoot up kind of fast. You can stake them up. I also want to point out that this in my garden is one of those plants that has a tendency to lean. And this does not freak me out. I know it really bothers a lot of people. But here's the thing. So see that corner picture up there with all of those? This is a Liatris that got bent over, and all of those are growing out of the side of it. So I tell you, just don't be discouraged and don't let somebody tell you, oh, that's wrong, because, you know, in nature, everything is not always perfect, and that's okay. Even when they're bent over, it finds a way. Plenty of pollinators are visiting it, and I just think I'm getting more bang for my buck in that instance. These don't, in my garden, they don't like to be overwatered. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't put a lot of water on it. And the other thing I like about the Liatrises are if you, they bloom, you know, shoots up the spike, and then it starts to bloom from the top, which you can really see from that corner picture. And once those seed heads are drying up at the top, if you're not trying to keep the seeds or you're not keeping it for wildlife or something, you can actually trim off that top, and then that's going to continue blooming down the spike. That makes the Liatrises pretty popular for in the floral trade and things like that, because you can kind of like trim it off and it'll still keep going for you in an arrangement. Lobelia Poobah is the downy lobelia, and I thought they looked pretty good out there today. It's going to be 2 to 5 feet high. Again, it's going to be that spike coming up. It takes sun or part shade. Sandy loam, likes acidic. So this one likes moderate to moist, but my understanding is it likes the moisture to be consistent. So if you're going to put this in a container and let it dry out for 3 weeks and then flood it with water, this may be not your plant. But I think they're beautiful. And what else is interesting, on here on the right, I have a picture of it sort of face on, so you can see what a pretty bloom it is. But then over here, I have with the butterfly, the side view, because the blossoms on this one tend to only come from one side of that stem. It's a very pretty color for, that late summer, early fall. Attracts bees, butterflies, hummingbirds. Laniceros sempervirens. If you know me or you've been to my garden, you know this is probably my favorite plant in my garden. I love this thing. So it is a perennial vine. It says nearly evergreen. It is evergreen for me. So you can see this was a few years ago when we got all those snows. Do you remember that? So it was blooming in December. It got snowed on, and it was blooming after the snow for me. It is in the sun. It is happy. It doesn't get any extra treatment, but it does bloom for me nearly year round. I would say it slows down a bit in the heat in the summer, but I still do have blossoms on it. This will bring you hummingbirds, 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 hummingbirds. I have hummingbirds in my garden every day, year round, except for maybe 1 or 2 weeks when the rufous have flown and the rubies have not arrived in the spring. This is the one that they're going to, because it's always doing something for me. So here on the swing, this is kind of an older picture, but this is 2 vines, 1 on each side. I just pruned it up, or trained it up. It was really easy to do, just kind of tied it down a few times. Oh, I thought we had a problem. Okay. So I just tied it up a little bit, and I prune this at most once a year. This is a really easy vine to maintain. It's not going to be like growing all over your neighbor's yard or something, and they're going to be complaining or anything like that. It's just a real easy, lovely plant. I've had mockingbirds nest in here. I've had wrens overwinter in it. I get long-tongued butterflies like sulfurs on it. Bumblebees. I've actually seen honeybees on this as well. The doves have sat on that swing and just eaten whatever's on the swing. I don't know what they're eating, but they're happy. And all the blossoms on the ground, this is clearly not when the rabbit was there, because the rabbit comes and eats all those fallen blossoms for me, and I'll never have to clean it up. Malvaviscus Drummondii. Turkscap is another perennial shrub. It's going to get 3 to 6 feet This over here, this picture is actually taken. It's not just one shrub, so don't be frightened. But it is one of those that might colonize, so you can just keep it in bounds if you like. This is actually in the Keene Island Master Plan community. As you're coming up from Old Katy on Highway 90, you come up Keene Island Parkway, and at least in that section, the neighborhood did a good job of planting a number of great natives. And I really think things like that, Turkscap, beautyberry, stuff like that, really helps me and my wildscape. I do think that makes a difference. So this is a great, lovely plant. Another one in that heat, bloom, bloom, bloom. So there's a woman named Ginger Webb. Has anybody heard of Ginger Webb? Yeah, so she does is a herbal medicine kind of a thing. And so Ginger says that not only can you eat the fruit, but you can crush up the leaves and use it as an emollient, or as, I haven't tried it yet, as a treatment for insect bites. So I thought that was really interesting. The Monarda punctata, we have a couple of great bee balms, and I think we actually have both the Monarda and the Citriodora here today. The spotted bee balm, as you can see modeled by the wasp up here, is the one that's going to have the flowers are actually going to have the spots on them. And color-wise, it's not always easy to tell by the bracts because the punctata, the spotted one, can have the white or even up to a lavendery kind of a bract, whereas the Citriodora, I think, is going to be more of a lavender. In my garden, the Citriodora blooms earlier. I'm not going to guarantee that's what's going to happen, but usually what happens is the Citriodora comes up, and then while that is still going, then the punctata kicks in, and the leaves on the punctata are maybe going to be a little more of an oregano versus that maybe citrusy smell on the Citriodora. And the common name for this is bee balm, and they are not kidding. I am always getting all kinds of different pollinators on this. And even this week, even though, they're starting, you see the bloom period, it's April to August, it's late September, my punctatas are still going. Some of them have, gone to seed, but the hummingbirds are still diving in there. So hummingbirds as well. I just think this is a really great plant. It's an annual. It might not stay put where you put it, but you can move it around. And once you have it, you'll always have it. Enothera lindheimeri was called Agora, and is still called Agora by many of us, is pink butterflies. And this is a perennial kind of it's not really a shrub, but because it's not really woody, I don't know. It's an interesting, it can look almost shrubby sometimes. You see it up in the prairie, and they're like, some of them are big and stiff out there. So this has that gorgeous, gorgeous flower on it here on the right. And you can see that it gets the bees, but I've also get hummingbirds on it. And I took the picture on the bottom because what I wanted to point out was, in my garden, the Agora is in one of the beds that's out in the lawn area. And then behind it is the bed that has the statue and the trellises. And what I like about this is I can see through the Agora. So I'm getting the benefit of it. The pollinators are getting the benefit of it. But not only can I see through it, but I literally watch it dance. This is so popular with the bees, and what they do is they land on those flowers, and the stems are just so soft and gentle. You can see them moving in the wind too. But the bees will land on it, and when they're finished, they hop off, and it just kind of pops up, and it just looks like this. It's just so lovely to watch this thing moving. I really, really think this is something that you want in your garden. This one will reseed. So you might have more, gift your neighbors or whatever. The Munda Cinema Mia is one of those that just changed again, was Munda Cinema Mia. This is a perennial fern. It's going to get 3 to 6 feet high. This is going to be for that wet area you have, like a bog garden or something like that. This is a really interesting fern because with most ferns, the spores are on the bottom of those fronds, right? You've got the frond and then well, this one actually has non-fertile green fronds, and then it has this fertile, darker frond in the center, and it has that cinnamony kind of a hairy thing growing on it. So it's beautiful. It's a great plant for a wet area, sun, part shade, or shade. And another interesting thing about this is that they use part of it as a potting medium for orchids. Great for nesting material for birds, for host plant, for some of the moths and other insects. Prunus Mexicana. This is the Mexican plum tree. I don't have any large trees planted in my backyard, and I'm never going to put a large tree in my backyard. I feel like my neighborhood has taken care of that for me. So this is probably the biggest tree that I have planted. And it's not going to be a huge tree, maybe 15 to 35 feet. I have that it's slow growing, and it is slow growing for me, but I've heard people say that it's fast growing. So I'm not sure exactly what the conditions are for that. Sun or part shade, mine is absolutely in the sun. It puts on a really early show of these flowers in the spring. So if you're looking for an early bloomer, this is going to be the one. It is a really beautiful scent. Have you all smelled the Mexican plum? If you have not smelled a Mexican plum, you must smell a Mexican plum. That little tiny tree really does perfume the entire backyard with a really pleasant perfume. And it will just be covered with pollinators because, like I said, it's one of those really early bloomers for you. And after the blooms, you can start getting your plums, and the plums are edible by a variety of mammals and birds, including humans. And all sorts of wildlife just kind of hide in there. We find frogs, anoles, the hummingbirds, that's a favorite perch for them. Dry to moist, well drained. I would say that's probably where this is. It doesn't get supplemental water really or anything. Also, I think, and I don't have a close-up of this has a really pretty bark. So even if it's, it's the deciduous and the leaves are off, as it ages, that bark kind of peels off and you get these darker areas. It's really a lovely, lovely bark. The Rexi of Marianna, the Maryland meadow beauty, it's a perennial herb, 1 to 3 feet, blooms in the summer. So if you're missing something happening in the summer, and it's weird, a lot of people seem to have a lot of things. They're real big on the spring, they're really big on the fall. They kind of forget about the summer, maybe because nobody wants to be gardening in the heat, so you don't really think about things then. But so if you're looking for something for the summer, this might be it as well. But this does like a moist area, so you're going to find it in the ditches and the wetter meadows and things like that. If you have an area like that and you're looking for something to sort of fill it in, this might be the one for you. The Rexi of Marianna is actually endangered in several of the states on the East Coast, so it is a special plant. The Rus copelinum is the winged sumac or the shining sumac. It's a deciduous small tree. So here on the right, it looks very shrubby, and you can leave it like that. Or you can choose, as down in the picture down here where they've treated up a bit more, it has a shiny, really attractive leaf on it. And it's going to have yellow flowers that are going to turn into these panicles of seeds. And the USDA says 300 different kinds of birds might be feeding on those seeds. So that's really impressive. What else? Oh, the other thing I thought was interesting is this tree is in the cashew, pistachio, and mango family. I just wouldn't have looked at that and thought mango. The Salvia lauretta is a lyre leaf sage. This is one of my favorite ground covers in my garden. It's a perennial, and it's going to get 1 to 2 feet high. And again, that's just going to be those stems, because the basal growth is what's up there on that corner top left. And that's an evergreen, great ground cover. This is not ever going to be a specimen plant. This one really reseeds. So if you thought it was just a pretty flower and you were going to put it somewhere, this is not the one. I started with, I think, 3. It really filled in pretty quick for me. And then so on the bottom, this is it when it's in bloom in the spring, and it does bring in the pollinators. And I don't know about what's going on under there, but a lot of birds really like to forage in that. Once the seeds have started dropping and things like that, I get cardinals and finches and, in the winter, the ruby-crowned kinglets and stuff like that are all really kind of pecking around. They like it down there. That first picture, well, actually you can see it up there. I still have a marker. I have some of my milkweed is growing in this bed and quite happy growing in there. Scutellaria ovado, heartleaf skullcap, is part shade or shade. Blooms April to June, so it's a early summer, likes some moisture but some drought tolerance. So I think this is the one that doesn't do well in the heat, and that might be why mine disappeared out of the container this summer. So I'm waiting for it to come back because I am been told repeatedly that this baby's going to come back in my pot. It is a nectar source for butterflies and attracts hummingbirds. Real pretty blossom on it. Again, it's another one of those that's going to spread in a mint family, so you might want to put it in a container. The Silene subciliata is a gorgeous plant, and you can see Mark loves his. So this is our grower, Mark. Does everybody know Mark Morgenstern? So many of the lovely plants out here come from Mark's nursery, and he's very fond of his Silene subciliata. And I'm going to tell you about it, but I'm sorry to say it did not arrive. So we don't have this for sale today. But it is gorgeous. So when you do see it, Mark is actually going to be growing this himself. I think we usually source it from Doremus. The catchfly, I think, was really interesting, is not insectivorous. That's the one thing about this. It's got a sticky part on the stem that the insects get caught on, but this flower is not going to digest the insects. Silphium, the rosin weeds. If you do not have a rosin weed in your garden, I really encourage you to get one. I think these are a very versatile plant, and they are very, very long blooming. Just keep blooming and blooming. This says you can cut it back and it will regrow. I don't deadhead, but it just keeps blooming for me. I have mine mixed in with some little blue stems, my American basket flower come up in there, a nice variety of prairie plants. And mine actually gets afternoon shade. It doesn't really seem to lean, so, I wouldn't put it in heavy shade or heavy part shade, but I think it can take a little bit of shade. It's just awesome. There's always somebody visiting on it. The neat thing about this plant is it has a gorgeous blossom there, but the seeds are actually behind on the back of it, as opposed to in those disc flowers on the top. The seeds are over here on the second half of that middle picture. You can see the seeds on that. I think it's pretty easy to regrow, and there's a couple of varieties, and most people in this group will tell you we don't know the difference between one or the other. All I can say is if you get your hands on a rosin weed, I think you're going to like it. So Castrum Newtons is a yellow Indian grass. This is one of our important prairie grasses, and I think it works really well in a garden as well. You can see it here in my garden. It is in, it gets afternoon shade, and this is going to be your, sort of summer growth. You can see I'm just starting to get those stems jumping up on the top. It can get up to 3 to 8 feet high, but the inflorescence on it is just a really pretty yellow that's going to turn a darker color, kind of a reddish in the fall. They're just gorgeous. If you see a field full of these, it's really a beautiful thing. I think they work really well in a garden, and they're going to provide shelter, nesting material, seeds for mammals and birds. I'm not 100% sure we have the salt and pepper butterfly. Is that in our region? Wally?
Are you referring to checkered skippers?
The pepper and salt butterfly.
I'm afraid I don't know that common name.
I don't know. Well, we're going to have to look that one up. Okay, the Scipio Karpis orbiculatus is the coral berry. A deciduous shrub, maybe 1 to 3 feet high, April to July. Pretty greenish-white flower clusters. This one likes part sun, sand, loam, clay, low to medium water. This one might colonize a bit, but again, you know, you can either use it for erosion control or to fill in that area that's going to get a little more shade. I think that these berries are just stunning. I would love to have that in my garden. I don't really have a place for it, so we need a bigger yard. But I think it's a real lovely, lovely plant. Nectar and pollen, and the berries might attract some birds and small mammals. Tridens flavus is another great plant to put. I'm just going to stop here. Do you have grasses? Who has grasses in their garden? If you do not have grasses in your garden, I assure you there is a grass, a native grass, that will do well in your garden. And I really think that you should include it, because if you don't, you're really missing out on something. You know, they add a lot of, they add a lot of wildlife benefits, but they can really add some different structure to a garden to, you know, you get your different foliage, you get your different colors. You know, it's like here you can see the 2 different colors in those grasses. So this is the tridens on the right, and on the left is that Indian grass, which is kind of maybe a bluer green. So you can really play around with the textures and the colors with grasses. Tridens flavus is also called grease grass. And, you know, I don't know who gives these things these names, but that's not a very nice way to describe this. But what it is, it's a really shiny kind of, it does look a little greasy, but it's not greasy. It's it's just a really, what is the word for that? I don't know what the word for that is, but it is kind of a shiny thing. It's a really attractive inflorescence on this grass. And if you see a field of these, it's really stunning. The Verbena zutha. We are really, really, really trying to get more people to grow the Verbena zutha. We are fighting the Brazilian vervain everywhere. It's all over the fields. It's all over the prairies. It's just really a hassle. And so we would love to encourage people to not grow those non-native verbenas and focus on our lovely natives. This is another one of those airy plants. It's kind of hard to take a picture of it, but I did. So this is another one of those. This is blooming in that hot, miserable weather. It's got this, you know, it might get a little bit thinner on the bottom. It's going to get 3 to 6 feet. In my garden, it probably stays to the lower end. And the prairie, you might see them get a little bit to the taller end. But like I said, so they're thinner on the bottom. So this is a great plant to just throw in the middle of something else to take advantage of that space above some of your other flowers. And it is airy. You can see there's stuff growing in it. So this is, you know, what all is growing through this. We've got your Asclepias verticulata. There's tropical sage growing through it. There's different grasses. We've got winged loosestrife growing, and they kind of all. So it's a really great, versatile plant, and it does attract butterflies and other pollinators, as you can see. Again, really heat tolerant. Okay, my last plant. Okay, so Vernonia mazurica is the, I'm not actually going to do a Q&A on here. When I'm done with this, we're going to talk about how to do the plant sale.
And we're going to talk about the winners.
And we're going to talk about the winners, yes. So last plant, second to the last plant, is the Missouri ironweed. This is blooming right now, and you're going to get all kinds of butterflies all over this thing. The hummingbirds are visiting this. You get bees. It's a beautiful, bright color, really pops in your garden. Those blooms are going to be at the top of this kind of a taller stem. It says they spread by rhizomes. Clumps can be divided. I don't find it to be a particular problem in my garden. They do like moist prairies, but I think they do great in your average garden. And then last, is the Viburnum rufigulum. This is the rusty blackhaw viburnum, a deciduous tree, 12 to 30 feet, so it's kind of small. And this is another one of those. You can see this one, they've left it shrubby on the bottom. You can choose to kind of tree it up, or you can leave it down there, and that provides that other element to your wildlife. You get these, I think these are just the prettiest flowers on this shrub. I really like it. Followed by your fruits that apparently taste like raisins when they're ripe. This is actually kind of a hard tree to find, and we do have a number of them in the sale. So if you want, or you think you might want one of these, this might be your day to grab that. They do take some shade or some part sun or whatever. But if you want it to be taller, put it in the sun and give it a little more water. So now what I'm going to do is talk about how the plant sale is going to work.